Hello everyone, my name is Michelle Becerra and I am in Group D, and today I'll be discussing bills introduced in the US Congress and proposed in other countries would require that anyone buying a prepaid cell phone must show identification and register the cell phone. Okay, let's start with the arguments against the registration. The first argument is that it violates the Fourth Amendment. As many of you know, the Fourth Amendment states that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures should not be violated, and no warrant should issue but upon a probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. This pretty much means that the Fourth Amendment sets limits on the government's rights to search and seize personal effects. If the registration process of the cell phone were to be under the US government and database, such thing would be unconstitutional for such a law. Our next argument is personal property. Cell phones are personal property of their users. People have an expectation of privacy for their phones. Those forcefully registering or showing registration may be an act that forces one to reveal information that they do not want. Unless the reason for this kind of information is justified, such as being able to purchase tobacco products until 18 because of health concerns, such bills would be unlawful. Our next argument is privacy risk. The collection of data from the registration of prepaid phones could provide a privacy risk for its users. For example, the government could find new uses for the data that are not part of the original proposal. Like, the database could leak information if it were not designed properly. The database could be a potential target for identity thieves. Also, there's potential for employee abuse from those who use or maintain the data. There could be errors within the database, and it could be used as a resource for law enforcement agencies. The next argument is cheap phones. You can usually find any prepaid phone at a very low cost, and you can pay your minutes as you go. The last argument is that it's easy to avoid telemarketers. Being able to have multiple prepaid phones allows you to have many different phone numbers, which pretty much guarantees you that you will not be bothered by any telemarketer. They also come in handy in case of an emergency when your personal phone is not working. Now that we have discussed arguments against the registration, let's talk about arguments for the registration of prepaid phones. Our first argument is protect national security. Such a law would aid the government to use this information to protect the general public against threats of national security and criminal activity. It may also push away such threats because people who are using prepaid cell phones for criminal activity may have a slightly more difficult time obtaining prepaid cell phones due to being unable to obtain one without fear of revealing or linking their identity to its use, or being unable to register for one altogether. The next argument is personal benefits, like tracking your phone if it were to be stolen, providing statistics about your phone use, and helping law enforcement track down those who are using the phone for illegal purposes. Next, we have often used for explosive detonation. More prepaid cell phones trigger IEDs and other type of explosive, so benefits of registering phones would allow the police to track the phone if needed. Lastly, we have frequent criminal use. Some prepaid phones, or also known as burn phones, can be bought with cash. This is pretty much notorious for criminal use. And also, the phones are used for hostages, explosive, and other illegal activities. Now, let's talk on a more neutral stance. Our first argument is that the use of data could help government programs, but the misuse could be more dangerous. For example, the government already has databases containing the personal information of its citizens, such as tax, property, ownership, bankruptcy, and etc., that help government agencies perform their functions. Having a registration process for prepaid phones could be beneficial to the government to help determine eligibility for government benefits programs, detect fraud in government programs, collect taxes, and catch people who are breaking the law. At the same time, the misuse of such personal data could pose a threat to the privacy of the user of the prepaid phones. The last argument is that it could be used to find terrorists, but susceptible to false positives. In terms of terrorism, registration and showing off identification may be manners of preventing acts such as 9/11. The phones could be data mined to find terrorists and terrorist plots, then linked back to those who bought them by both location services that are on most phones and the name or ID they provide during purchases. Well, now that we have discussed arguments against the registration law, for the registration law, and a more neutral point of view, where do you stand?